Is it possible to get flower arranging inspiration from magazines which are nearly 20 years old? Hello there, I'm Julie from Julie Davis Flower Workshops and Flower Start, the online flower arranging classes. Now, if you are a thrifting fan and you like my Shop With Me videos, I'll leave a playlist for you in the show notes underneath this video. But if you're a flower arranger, or perhaps you've been to some of my classes in the past and you want to know where I get my inspiration from, I never say no to a flower arranging magazine. And this week I have been gifted all these magazines from one of my friends at Flower Club. She was a tiny bit apologetic because all the magazines are written in Dutch. She picks them up when she visits her family in Belgium. You'll have heard me talk about Google Lens when I've tried to find out more about the thrifted things that I find. But this weekend I had a chance conversation and I didn't know you could use Google Lens as a translator. So the fact that these magazines are all written in Dutch isn't going to hamper my enjoyment. I must admit it doesn't put me off when I've picked up foreign language magazines in the past. I just love seeing how other countries arrange their flowers. Now, if you're a flower fan and you too love all sorts of magazines, how do you sort them out and remember those things that you were inspired by? Now, this is a stash of my spring flower arranging magazines. What I do is I keep my magazines by season: spring, summer, autumn, Christmas and winter. And then what I do is, as the next season approaches, I take down my next chunk of magazines and I start reading them and I flick through them and I mark the pages. That way I can always go back and find out what it is that interested me about a particular project. I used to rip the pages of my magazine out and make up scrapbooks, but what I've found over time is that my tastes change, and sometimes I've got a picture and I'm thinking, what on earth was it about that picture that so intrigued me? So that's why I like to keep my magazines intact. So I'm not going to go through all the magazines. Why don't we go through the spring edition of this magazine, which is dated 2004, so it's 19 years old, and the question of the day is, how do you feel about that? Looking for inspiration from a magazine which is almost 20 years old. Don't forget to watch all the video, flick through the pages with me and tell me in the comments which pages inspired you and how you might interpret the project and bring it up to date. Let's put the kettle on and sit down with a cuppa and start flicking. I did notice that when I went through the magazines my friend gave me that I've actually got a duplicate for one of the magazines I've already got. Let me see whether I can find it. Ah, here it is. I didn't realise it was a duplicate until I came across this page. And those of you who've been to my Zoom flower classes will recognise this project. You can see exactly where my inspiration came from this project. I've had this for a year now in my workshop. It started to dry out, and in fact I'm on the point of throwing it away. And the other project I recognised was this one. Do you remember this one from class 2? I've dug around in my flower workshop and you can see that this is the version that I made. If you're interested in following along with these two projects, and in fact I would think there were 8 projects altogether in this particular series, you can download the classes from my website so you can watch and create at a time and place that suits you. I rather like this. It's quite sculptural, and in fact I made a point of putting it in the garden for a couple of days so these uncovered metal wires are starting to rust up and get a little bit of texture to them. So I don't need 2 copies of this magazine. I shall keep mine on my pile and pass this one on to a friend. So how's your Dutch? Can you read what it says? It's obviously a special magazine. I think this is flower arranging, and lente is the word for spring, although also I think voorjaar might mean spring too. Excuse my pronunciation. I'm not fluent in Dutch. So let's have a closer look at this magazine and see what will inspire us. You can see I've already marked a couple of pages. So watch this space. You may see some of these projects coming to another YouTube video or perhaps to Zoom flower class in the future. So what do you reckon? Do you think a magazine that's 20 years old has got any relevance today? Is there going to be anything that I can use to inspire me? Well, let's take a closer look. Lots of twigs being used, which is really great for foam-free arrangements. What does intrigue me here is this little collar detail. I thought first of all it was some kind of leaf, and then I used Google Lens and I was able to find out that this is some sort of exotic pod. So I can't get hold of that. That's not going to be so easy to get hold of, but I'm just wondering whether I could substitute some bark, perhaps some eucalyptus bark, which falls off the trees, and cut it down to size. So even if I couldn't read what it said here in Dutch, I would take a little bit of time to forensically look at the photographs. You can see here there's a tiny metal ring with some pins, and this has been created by pinning the little exotic pods onto the pin until they're covered right up to the tip. I think I had a preference. I wouldn't rely on the pinning method. I might get my hot glue gun out instead. And here is a construction made out of dogwood. And in fact, many years ago, I bought a cube from a wholesaler in Holland that had a very similar look to this, and I've never used it. It may be that you've got a cube like this yourself that you've picked up years and years ago, or perhaps you could painstakingly make your own structure and then use test tubes to put your flowers in. I love this idea. Now this is made with Galax sleeves, which can be quite expensive to buy, and you'll notice the use of flower foam. I'm wondering whether this project could be adapted and perhaps use rolled up ivy leaves and then put those into a shallow bowl, and you wouldn't need to use any flower foam to hold them in place, but you probably would need to turn your bowl on its side and pack the rolled leaves in from the bottom and then fill up to the top. And imagine that you'll need loads and loads of leaves. But I quite like this idea, and it's just got the simple addition of some forget-me-nots, which aren't quite in season yet in my garden, but there's plenty of springtime left to think about doing this project. This would be such a lovely little arrangement, and in fact it's not so dissimilar to the ones I've been showing you on my YouTube live videos recently. Pick a nice container, this one's on a pedestal foot, repot. Take your grape hyacinths out of the pots, plant them into your container, and then decorate with moss and lichen covered twigs. Look at this wonderful eye-catching arrangement here. It would be really expensive to make. These are lengths of flexigrass, and when you buy flexigrass, you buy about that much at once. So this would probably have taken 6, 7, 8 bundles of flexigrass to make. Although having said that, it will probably last you a long time, although you would have to replace your fresh spring bulbs from time to time. Not personally my taste, but a very structural look. Now this is something I think you could achieve quite easily. These are chopped up stems of dogwood, so you could fill a large glass vase, fill it right up with water, and then slide quite short lengths of iris into the top, and there's a few little quail's eggs just bringing you that Eastery touch. And what do you think about this caging? I think it looks a little bit dated to my eye. Now one thing I am thinking about doing is perhaps recreating this arrangement made of that last Icelandic poppies, and can you see, if I lift that slightly closer to the camera, the little playful placement of rubber ducks. So quite a shallow container, massed with twigs, and then with the stems slid down inside. You'll have to watch on to the end of the video and see how I interpret this project. I love this arrangement. It's a mix of very short stem flowers. In fact, it brings me in mind of something I did at a recent class I went to. Let me show you. You see what I mean? This massed grouping of very short flowers. I've got mine glued on to a little wreath base, but it's the same sort of look and looks equally as relevant today as it did 20 years ago. One thing I think that has dated a little bit is this group of tulips and ranunculus. See how the binding goes right the way up to the top? This binding has been done with string, but it was also popular with ribbons on bridal bouquets, although it's not quite so common these days. The fashion now is for long trailing ribbons. Let me know in the comments if you see anything that catches your eye. Now look at this. I think the finished look is well and truly dated. I can remember buying feathers and using gauzy ribbons 20 years ago. But perhaps if you delve a little bit deeper, it might give you a really good idea of how you could arrange your spring flowering bulbs. In fact, the friend who gave me these magazines had a similar style arrangement in her haul. 2 containers, a larger one, and she had pebbles in the bottom of hers, with a smaller one inside which had tulips in it, and it did look really effective. So the smaller, narrower vase in the middle is giving a collar or support to your spring flowers, and then by sitting that into the larger container, it just gives the arrangement more stability, more status. But yes, I'd leave out the ribbons and the little feathers. And what do you think about this arrangement? I'm not convinced at all. I don't really like the use of the pearls. I think they're a little bit dated, especially here when they're nestled inside the heads of the roses. And the string just seems like overkill. It's not there to support any of the flowers, but it would make quite a good flower frog if you're planning on going foam free. So whenever you're flicking through the magazines, don't overlook the pages that don't catch your eye. Make sure you have a look at the mechanics and see whether you could adapt those for something and use them for something that's more relevant to you today. A bit of leaf manipulation and plaited flexigrass. Again, that must have cost a fortune to put together. I do quite like this idea though. It's almost Ikebana-esque. So a low trough container, and then these little twigs have been put through, dividing the container into different portions with just a minimal amount of materials in each. A really effective way of displaying your flowers and your little decorative details without having to spend a fortune. More of this caging effect. I think I prefer this caging compared to the one earlier on. I like the looser style to it. And you can see here that the container is much deeper, probably about 2/3 of the overall design, and the top section is just 1/3 of the overall design, which gives it a really clean-cut, modern look. And I was quite intrigued by this page too. Check out the mechanics. So we're trying to move away from using flower foam, but what attracted me here was the way that this flat wreath then became something with a vertical placement. So you can imagine that with my wreath that I made at my workshop last weekend, if I was to attach a pair of sticks at the bottom, I could get it to stand up in a vase. What do you reckon to that? Rather a good idea, isn't it? Changing it from a horizontal design to one that's vertical. I can tell this is a European magazine because our wreath frames never look like this. Can you see how shallow the base is there? And they've backed 2 together. I noticed these in the wholesalers in Belgium when I visited Fleuramour last September. And if you're interested in that weekend away, I'll leave a link to the 2 videos in the show notes under this one. I hope you enjoyed flicking through my 20-year-old flower arranging magazine, and perhaps it's given you some inspiration of arrangements you could make this springtime. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give me a like and let me know in the comments which was your favourite arrangement from this magazine, or let me know which of the arrangements look a little bit out of date to your taste and how you would adapt it to bring it up to date. That's all from me for now, and I'll see you again next time.